Welcome to this special reading of Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince. Although we've updated the language to make it clearer for today's listeners, this seminal work, written in the early 16th century, remains one of the most influential books in political philosophy. It has shaped conversations on power, leadership and statecraft for generations. I invite you now to join me in stepping back into Renaissance Italy as we experience The Prince in a more accessible style, while preserving Machiavelli's enduring insights. If you enjoy diving into classic books like this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It really helps us keep bringing you free audiobooks. Now, let's begin with the opening letter to the Prince. Chapter 1. The various kinds of government and the ways they are established. All states and territories that rule over people have been, or still are, governed as either republics or monarchies. Monarchies can be hereditary, meaning the same family has ruled them for many years, or they can be newly founded. Some new monarchies are completely new creations, as Milan once was for Francesco Sforza. Others are added to a prince's existing hereditary lands, such as when the Kingdom of Naples was joined to the King of Spain's possessions. These acquired territories were either used to having a different prince in charge or had been free. They come under a new prince's authority through his own arms, someone else's arms, good fortune, or personal merit. Chapter 2. Of Hereditary Monarchies. I will not speak here of republics, having covered them elsewhere. Let us focus on monarchies, and examine how the types mentioned can be governed and preserved. First, in a hereditary state already accustomed to its ruling family, maintaining authority is much easier than in newly founded monarchies. It is enough to avoid straying from long-standing practices and to respond to changing events as necessary. This means a prince of ordinary ability can usually remain in control, unless some very powerful outside force removes him. Even then, if a crisis later arises for the new ruler, the old prince can often recover his domain. In Italy, for example, the Duke of Ferrara managed to hold his territory against the Venetians in 1484 and against Pope Julius in 1510, largely due to the deep roots of his family's rule. Since a legitimate hereditary prince creates fewer reasons for offence, his subjects naturally tend to remain loyal. If no extreme misdeeds make him hated, people are unlikely to seek major changes, and the long memory of his family's rule soothes away initial fears. Chapter 3. Of Mixed Monarchies. But it is in newly acquired monarchies that real difficulties arise. First, if a territory is not entirely new, but rather joined to an existing state, thus forming a mixed monarchy. Its troubles grow from a typical tendency found in all fresh conquests. People change masters willingly, hoping to improve their situation, but end up disappointed, discovering they have gone from bad to worse. This is partly due to the harm necessarily done to those who fall under the prince's authority. His soldiers bring losses, and a host of other injuries follow an occupation. Thus, the prince makes enemies of those who have suffered harm in the takeover and cannot fully satisfy those who helped him, because he cannot meet all their expectations. He also cannot treat them harshly, as he is indebted to them. For these reasons, however large his army may be, he will still need the goodwill of the local population to secure a province. Louis XIV of France learned this when he seized Milan easily, but then lost it just as fast. Ludovico Sforza alone was able to drive him out, since the inhabitants who had gladly opened their gates to Louis, believing they would benefit, felt misled and could no longer tolerate his new rule. Indeed, once a prince reclaims a rebellious province, that territory is not so easily lost again. After being pushed out, the prince becomes more determined to protect himself by punishing offenders, investigating potential threats, and fortifying weak points. So, while Duke Ludovico's mere presence on the border caused France to lose Milan the first time, the second loss came only when nearly the whole world turned against the French, after their foes had been beaten and driven out of Italy. Yet, despite the different circumstances, France lost Milan both times. The main reasons for the first failure have been discussed. We must now see why the second happened, and how the French might have avoided it, or what another ruler could have done differently in that situation. Note also that once a newly annexed region shares the language and customs of its ruler, holding it is much easier, particularly if it is not used to independence. The conqueror need only extinguish the old ruling family and alter neither the existing laws nor the taxes. Then, very soon, the new territory will merge seamlessly with the old one and form a single state. Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy, long united under France, show how minor differences in speech matter little if the general culture is similar. Anyone who acquires such lands and wants to keep them must remember two things: wipe out the old royal line and keep their traditional institutions and taxes. In this way, they will quickly become part of one realm. However, if the region acquired differs in language, law, and custom, the difficulties are serious. Good fortune and skill are needed to hold it. One of the best ways is for the prince to reside there personally, as the Turk did in Greece. Even with all his other policies, he could not have succeeded without moving there himself. When present, a prince can detect problems as soon as they arise and remedy them quickly. Ruling from afar, he will only hear of them when they grow past a cure. Besides, the prince's local officials are less likely to oppress the people if he is nearby, and the locals, being able to approach him easily, will be more inclined to love him if they wish to be loyal, and to fear him if they do not. Any outside power that wants to invade such a domain will hesitate more if the prince is living there, because driving him out is harder. Another strong measure is to establish colonies in one or two critical locations, which act as the keys of the territory. Such colonies cost the prince little, since maintaining them involves only a few settlers, and only those dispossessed of land are injured, forming a small fraction of the population. Those left homeless are now poor and scattered, incapable of harming him, while everyone else, spared and fearful of suffering the same fate, tends to keep the peace. Hence, colonies are affordable, loyal, and cause minimal anger. The harmed minority, being weakened, cannot strike back. Remember that people should either be well treated or crushed so completely that they cannot take revenge. If you rely on a garrison instead of colonists, you spend more and drain the province's revenues. You also upset many, because the entire local community resents quartering troops in their midst, creating enemies who may still resist in their own homes. Compared to this, colonies are a far more useful solution. For furthermore, a prince ruling a foreign land of this nature should make himself the protector of smaller neighbouring states, while striving to reduce the power of any who are strong. He must also ensure that an equally mighty foreign ruler does not enter that region at the request of local malcontents, a risk that appears whenever those who are ambitious or fearful call in outsiders, as happened when the Aetolians invited the Romans into Greece. Indeed, wherever the Romans arrived, it was usually because the inhabitants themselves had appealed to them. The general principle is that when a powerful outsider appears, all the lesser local lords eagerly align themselves with him, driven by the envy they hold toward those currently ruling. It is therefore easy for the newcomer to win them over. But he must be cautious not to let them gain too much authority. With his own forces and their support, he can manage greater powers and thus become the main arbiter in the region. If he does not govern well in this way, he will soon lose what he has won, or at the very least be burdened by endless difficulties. In every province they conquered, the Romans followed these rules. They set up colonies, befriended the smaller powers without letting them become too strong, lowered the influence of any that were great, and refused to let foreign rulers gain sway there. Consider Greece alone as an example. They formed alliances with the Achaeans and the Aetolians, toppled the Kingdom of Macedonia, and drove out Antiochus. Nor did they let the merits of the Achaeans or Aetolians earn them an expansion of territory. Nor did they allow Philip, through persuasion, to gain their friendship without diminishing his strength. Neither did Antiochus's might induce them to permit him to hold any foothold in that province. The Romans did what all wise princes should do. They looked not only at immediate dangers, but also at those in the future, and they took precautions. Threats foreseen from afar can be addressed easily, but if you wait until they are upon you, no remedy is possible. This situation is like certain illnesses that are easy to cure, but hard to recognize early on. Yet if not treated, they become easy to diagnose, but impossible to cure. So it is with matters of state. Only a prudent ruler discerns troubles in advance. If you act promptly, you can solve them. But if you let them grow until everyone can see them, then the time for remedies is gone. Observing these perils while they were still distant, the Romans always moved to prevent them, never hesitating to start a war if it would avert a larger conflict in the future. They knew that wars cannot truly be avoided, only delayed, to the advantage of the other side. They declared war on Philip and Antiochus in Greece rather than wait until they threatened Italy. Even though they might have stalled conflict, they preferred to rely on their own strength and wisdom rather than leave matters to chance. Time can bring good or ill equally. Let us now examine whether France followed these principles when it came to Italy. I shall not speak of Charles VIII, but of Louis XIV, whose actions are more evident because he occupied parts of Italy for a longer period. We will see that Louis did nearly the opposite of what must be done to hold a foreign territory. King Louis was brought into Italy by the Venetians, who hoped, through his involvement, to gain half of Lombardy. I do not fault him for accepting their invitation or for his initial actions, because he wanted a foothold in Italy. Given that King Charles VIII had previously closed off all friendly doors, Louis had to take any alliance available. Indeed, his plans would likely have succeeded swiftly, if not for mistakes he made afterward. Having once taken Lombardy, Louis immediately recovered the reputation that Charles had lost. Genoa submitted, Florence became friendly, and many local rulers, from the Marquis of Mantua, the Dukes of Ferrara and Bentivogli, to the Lady of Forlì and the Lords of Faenza, Pesaro, Rimini, Camerino, and Piombino, along with the cities of Lucca, Pisa, and Siena, all sought his favour. The Venetians might then have realized how their ambition, in aiming for just a few Lombard lands, had made the king master of 2/3 of Italy. Imagine how simple it would have been for Louis to maintain his standing if he had followed the rules outlined above, retaining the loyalty of so many uncertain allies, each of whom feared either the Church or the Venetians. With their collective support, he could have kept any remaining powerful forces in check. But once in Milan, he did the opposite. He helped Pope Alexander VI occupy the Romagna. In doing so, he weakened himself, lost the friendship of those who had aligned themselves with him, and empowered the Church by supplementing its spiritual might with significant temporal authority. Having made that first mistake, he had to commit others, for he had to intervene again in Italy to stop Alexander from seizing Tuscany, and as though it were not enough that he had enlarged the Church's power and lost his own allies, he then, seeking the kingdom of Naples, divided it with the King of Spain, thus inviting a formidable foreign rival. Where once he could have been the sole arbiter in Italy, he now created a partner for dissatisfied local factions to call upon. Where a king might have been kept in Naples who owed Louis tribute, Louis instead replaced him with someone capable of driving out the French altogether. It is natural and forgivable for men to seek to expand their domains if they can, and they are often praised for success. But if they lack the strength yet persist in trying, they invite blame. If France could have taken Naples by herself, she should have done so. If not, she should never have split it. If dividing Lombardy with the Venetians could be excused, since it enabled the French to enter Italy, this other division was inexcusable and unnecessary. In total, Louis made 5 mistakes. He destroyed smaller powers, strengthened one ruler in Italy, brought in a very strong foreign power, did not establish himself by residing there, and did not plant colonies. Yet these mistakes might not have been fatal if he had not committed a 6th, seizing territory from the Venetians. Had he not already built up the Church and admitted the Spaniards into Italy, attacking the Venetians might have been justified and necessary. But after his earlier actions, he should have refused to break them, since if they had remained strong, they would have prevented others from encroaching on Lombardy. On one hand, the Venetians would never have accepted any arrangement that gave Lombardy to anyone but themselves. On the other powers would have hesitated to wrest Lombardy from France only to hand it over to Venice, and they would have been reluctant to challenge both France and Venice at once. If someone says that King Louis ceded the Romagna to Pope Alexander and shared Naples with Spain to avoid war, I answer, based on what I have already argued, that one should never let a troubling situation grow simply to escape war. For by doing so, war is not avoided, but only postponed to one's detriment. If others invoke the pledges the king made to the Pope in exchange for dissolving his marriage and granting a cardinal's rank to Rohan, I will respond later when I discuss the faith of princes and how it should be observed. Thus, King Louis lost Lombardy because he failed to follow the rules that other conquerors have used successfully. There is no miracle in this outcome. It was a clear, natural consequence of his choices. I spoke of this with Cardinal Rohan in Nantes, when Cesare Borgia, also called Valentine and the son of Pope Alexander, was taking control of the Romagna. In that conversation, after Cardinal Rohan remarked that the Italians did not know how to wage war, I replied that the French did not understand politics, or they would not have allowed the Church to grow so powerful. Indeed, experience shows that both the Church and Spain have risen to great heights in Italy at France's expense, and their triumph has led to France's decline. From this, we can derive a general rule that seldom fails. Whoever is responsible for another's rise to power will be destroyed by the very power he helped create. For the new ruler always views his benefactor with suspicion, whether that favour was gained by cunning or force. Chapter 4. Why the Kingdom of Darius, occupied by Alexander, did not rebel against the successors of the latter after his death. Considering the challenges of ruling newly acquired states, it is remarkable that Alexander the Great conquered Asia in a short time and, despite his sudden death, his successors maintained control without much difficulty beyond their internal conflicts. The explanation lies in the governance structures of kingdoms. Some are ruled by a prince and his appointed ministers, while others involve a prince alongside barons with independent power. In the first system, the prince holds all authority, while in the second, barons have their own loyal subjects. For example, the Turkish monarchy is centralized under one ruler, with administrators acting solely as his agents, whereas the King of France governs alongside entrenched nobles. It is harder to conquer a kingdom like Turkey, but easier to hold it afterward, while the reverse is true for a kingdom like France. Alexander's success in holding Asia stemmed from the nature of Darius's kingdom, similar to Turkey's centralized model. Once Alexander defeated Darius and eliminated his family, the state remained secure, as there were no independent nobles to instigate rebellion. His successors faced no external challenges, only internal disputes. This contrasts with regions like France, where multiple principalities and nobles complicated Roman efforts to maintain control. Chapter 5. The way to govern cities or dominions that prior to being occupied lived under their own laws. When conquering states accustomed to freedom, there are three ways to maintain control: destroy them, reside there personally, or let them keep their laws while establishing a loyal ruling elite. The latter group, being dependent on the new ruler, helps maintain order. Historical examples show mixed success. The Spartans created small ruling elites in Athens and Thebes, but ultimately lost them. The Romans, by contrast, destroyed rebellious cities like Carthage and Numantia, ensuring long-term control. Free cities resist foreign rulers due to their enduring attachment to liberty. Pisa, for example, rebelled against Florence despite years of subjugation. On the other hand, cities accustomed to monarchy adapt more easily to new rulers, especially if the old royal family is extinguished. Without a tradition of self-rule, these cities are slower to revolt, making them easier to govern. In contrast, republics have stronger communal identities and memories of freedom, making their subjugation either temporary or dependent on their complete destruction. Chapter 6. Of new dominions which have been acquired by one's own arms and powers. In discussing newly acquired dominions, it is important to look at exemplary leaders, as their methods can guide others. Wise leaders, like skilled archers, aim higher than their target to increase their chances of success. Whether a leader acquires power through ability or fortune, both play a role in mitigating challenges. Leaders like Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus achieved greatness through their capabilities, seizing opportunities to establish new orders. Their successes were not due to fortune alone, but also to their readiness to act decisively when the moment arose. Moses led the oppressed Israelites out of Egypt. Cyrus unified discontented Persians, and Romulus founded Rome, after overcoming personal adversity. Each used their abilities to shape events and secure their rule. Creating new orders is inherently risky. Innovators face resistance from those who benefit from the old system, and tepid support from those who stand to gain from the new. Success depends on whether they can rely on their own strength or must depend on others. Armed leaders who enforce their changes tend to succeed, while unarmed ones, like Fra Girolamo Savonarola, fail when belief in their ideas wanes. Jerome of Syracuse exemplifies this principle. Rising from a private citizen to ruler, he restructured the military, built alliances, and secured his position. Though his rise was difficult, he maintained power with relative ease by relying on his own forces and strategies. Chapter 7 of New Dominions Acquired by the Power of Others, or by Fortune. Those who rise from private citizens to rulers through fortune face little difficulty in ascending, but much in maintaining their position. Their path to power is smooth as they are lifted by external forces, but their challenges begin once they are established. Such rulers often rely entirely on the will and luck of those who elevated them, both of which are fickle and unreliable. They typically lack the skills to govern effectively, as they have not prepared themselves or built a solid foundation to command. Unless they are exceptionally capable, they are unable to secure their position. States acquired suddenly, like plants that grow too quickly, lack deep roots and are easily toppled by the first storm. To succeed, a ruler must act immediately to reinforce their position, addressing weaknesses that others typically prepare for in advance of gaining power. Two notable examples illustrate this: Francesco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. Francesco, through skill and effort, rose from citizen to Duke of Milan and maintained his position with little trouble after overcoming significant challenges. Cesare Borgia, however, gained power through his father's influence and lost it due to misfortune, despite employing every strategy a capable leader could to secure his state. Cesare's example shows how firm foundations can be laid even after gaining power, though it comes with great difficulty and risk. His failure was not due to personal mistakes, but to extraordinary bad luck, and his efforts provide valuable lessons for new rulers. To strengthen his son Cesare's position, Alexander VI faced significant obstacles. He sought to make Cesare a ruler in Italy, but most Italian states opposed him. To disrupt this resistance, Alexander leveraged the Venetians' invitation to the French to invade Italy. He facilitated this by annulling King Louis's marriage, enabling French troops to aid his campaigns. Cesare conquered Romagna and defeated the Colonnas with the reputation and forces of the French king. However, he faced two major threats: distrust of his troops' loyalty and the ambitions of the French king. Recognizing these dangers, Cesare decided to build his own power base, weakening the Orsini and Colonna factions in Rome. He gained the loyalty of their followers by offering positions, pensions, and honors. Once the opportunity arose, he decisively crushed the Orsini leaders, further solidifying his power. Cesare's rule in Romagna serves as a key example of his methods. When he took control, the region was in chaos due to weak and corrupt rulers. To restore order, he appointed Messer Ramiro d'Orco, a strict but capable administrator with full authority. D'Orco quickly established stability, but Cesare, wary of the resentment such harsh governance could provoke, removed him to win the people's favor. D'Orco's execution in a public square, with a blood-stained knife beside him, shocked and satisfied the populace, demonstrating Cesare's control and ensuring their loyalty. Having secured Romagna, Cesare sought to free himself from dependence on France while pursuing further conquests. He aligned cautiously with France during their conflict with Spain over Naples, seeking to maintain their favour while avoiding reliance. Preparing for the death of his father, Alexander VI, Cesare took steps to ensure his position. He eliminated rival factions, gained the support of Roman nobles, and consolidated his influence within the College of Cardinals. However, Alexander's death left Cesare vulnerable. Weakened by illness and caught between powerful armies, he struggled to maintain his gains. Despite these challenges, Cesare's strong foundations allowed him to hold out longer than expected. Cesare's ultimate failure was due to circumstances beyond his control. He told me that he had prepared for every eventuality except being gravely ill at his father's death. His downfall was compounded by his failure to prevent the election of Julius II, a hostile pope to whom past offences could not be forgiven. Those whom he had injured were, among others, San Pietro ad Vincula, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio. Cesare underestimated the enduring impact of old grievances, which contributed to his loss of power. The lessons from Cesare's rise and fall are invaluable for rulers seeking to secure their positions. His ability to consolidate power, gain loyalty, and manage both allies and enemies provides a blueprint for effective leadership. However, his failure to manage the papal succession underscores the importance of addressing every potential threat. Cesare's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a model for those who rise to power through fortune and the arms of others. Chapter 8, of those who have attained the position of prince by villainy. There are two ways to become a prince that are not fully due to fortune or ability, and these should be considered. These are when someone becomes a prince through evil or criminal actions, or when a private citizen rises to power with the support of fellow citizens. I will give two examples of the first method, one from ancient times and one from modern times, which should be enough for those who might need to follow these examples. Agathocles of Sicily rose from a low position in society to become king of Syracuse. Born as the son of a potter, he lived a wicked life but showed great determination and strength. He joined the military and worked his way up to become praetor of Syracuse. Deciding to seize power through violence, he made an alliance with Hamilcar the Carthaginian. He called a meeting of the people and senate of Syracuse, pretending it was for important public business. Once they were gathered, he had his soldiers kill all the senators and the richest citizens. After this, he took control of the city and ruled without facing further internal unrest. Although he was twice defeated by the Carthaginians and eventually besieged, he managed to defend Syracuse. He left part of his army to protect the city and invaded Africa with the rest. In a short time, he freed Syracuse from the siege and forced the Carthaginians into peace, leaving him ruler of Sicily. Anyone who looks at his actions and qualities will see little that can be credited to fortune. His rise came through his own efforts in the military, achieved through hard work and great risks. However, killing one's fellow citizens, betraying friends, and living without faith, compassion, or religion may bring power but not glory. Agathocles' bravery and ability to overcome dangers are impressive, but his cruelty and many crimes exclude him from being considered among the greatest leaders. In modern times, Oliverotto da Fermo offers another example. Orphaned as a boy, he was raised by his uncle Giovanni Fogliani, who sent him to train under Paolo Vitelli. Oliverotto quickly rose through the military ranks to become a leader, but wanted greater power. With the help of some citizens of Fermo who preferred tyranny over freedom, and the support of the Vitelli family, he planned to take control of the city. He wrote to Giovanni, claiming he wanted to visit his hometown after many years away, and asked to be received with honor. He arrived with a group of 100 followers. Giovanni welcomed him warmly and provided lodging in his own home. After a few days, Oliverotto invited Giovanni and the city's leaders to a banquet. During the meal, Oliverotto began discussing the ambitions of Pope Alexander and his son Cesare. Pretending to want a private conversation, he led Giovanni and others into another room, where soldiers emerged and killed them all. Oliverotto then took control of the city, forced the remaining leaders to obey him, and established himself as prince. He strengthened his position through civil and military measures, becoming powerful in Fermo and feared by neighboring cities. However, his success ended when he was tricked by Cesare Borgia and captured. 1 year after his rise, Oliverotto was executed along with Vitellozzo, his mentor in both skill and cruelty. Some may wonder how men like Agathocles could maintain their power for years despite their cruelty, while others fail. The reason lies in whether their cruelty is used wisely or poorly. Cruelty is used wisely when it is applied quickly and only once to secure power, followed by actions that benefit the people. Poorly used cruelty continues over time, increasing hatred and instability. A ruler must commit necessary harsh actions all at once and avoid repeating them. Benefits should be given gradually to win trust and gratitude. Above all, a prince must govern in a way that ensures stability, as it is too late to inspire loyalty when adversity strikes. Chapter 9 of the Civic Principality. Now we discuss how a citizen becomes a prince, not through crime or violence, but with the support of fellow citizens. This is called a civic principality. Achieving this role depends partly on ability and partly on fortune, but also on cleverness helped by luck. A person can gain this position with the support of the people or the nobles. In every city, these two groups exist. The people want to avoid oppression, and the nobles want to dominate the people. From this conflict, cities create either a monarchy, liberty, or disorder. When the nobles cannot overpower the people, they may unite to make one of their own a prince, using his authority to serve their goals. On the other hand, when the people cannot resist the nobles, they create a prince to protect themselves. A prince supported by the nobles faces more difficulty maintaining power than one supported by the people, because nobles consider themselves equals to the prince and resist control. A prince backed by the people finds it easier to rule, since the people see him as their protector. The people's desires are more straightforward than the nobles'. The people only want to avoid oppression, while the nobles want to oppress. A prince has less to fear from a hostile populace, as their worst action is to abandon him. A prince faces greater danger from hostile nobles, who may betray or oppose him, since they are more cunning and influential. A prince must live with the same people for his entire rule, but he can replace disloyal nobles as needed, promoting or demoting them at will. Nobles can be categorized into two types. Some depend entirely on the prince's fortunes and are not greedy. These should be honoured and trusted. Others do not depend on the prince and are motivated by self-interest or ambition. These are dangerous and should be regarded as hidden enemies who will act against the prince in times of trouble. A prince supported by the people must maintain their trust, which is easy as they only ask not to be oppressed. A prince supported by the nobles but disliked by the people must work to gain their favour. Protecting the people is the best way to earn their loyalty. When people receive unexpected kindness from a ruler they often become more loyal than if they had supported him from the start. A prince can win the people's loyalty in various ways, depending on the situation. However, in times of trouble, a prince without the people's friendship has no defence. Nabis, Prince of Sparta, successfully defended his state against the combined forces of Greece and Rome, because he had the people's support. The saying, "He who builds on the people builds on mud," only applies to private citizens who trust the people to rescue them without authority or preparation. A prince who leads with courage, prepares wisely, and inspires the people will not be betrayed by them. A prince who governs through magistrates is more at risk than one who commands directly. Magistrates may fail to act or even oppose the prince in times of crisis. A wise prince ensures that his people rely on him directly, making his rule indispensable. Such a prince builds strong foundations that remain stable in both calm and turbulent times. Usually, civic principalities face danger when a prince transitions from being a civil leader to an absolute ruler. If a prince relies on magistrates to govern, his position becomes weaker, because citizens used to taking orders from magistrates may resist the prince's direct commands during emergencies. A prince cannot wait for adversity to assert authority, as his unpreparedness will leave him without reliable supporters. In peaceful times, everyone appears loyal and ready to support the prince because there is no immediate danger. However, in difficult times, the prince may find himself abandoned by all but a few. This makes the situation more dangerous, as the prince can only discover the loyalty of his subjects when it is too late to act. For this reason, a wise prince ensures that his subjects always depend on his government. By making himself necessary to the people, he guarantees their loyalty in all situations. Chapter 10. How the strength of all states should be measured. When examining the types of principalities, it is important to consider whether a prince can defend himself alone or needs the help of others. To explain this better, I consider those capable of defending themselves alone as those who, through enough soldiers or money, can raise an army to fight any enemy. Those who need help are unable to face their enemies in the open field and must retreat to their fortified towns and rely on defence. For the second case, the only advice is for the prince to focus on fortifying and provisioning his town, leaving the countryside to its fate. A well-fortified town and a prince who is not hated by his people will be hard to attack. People avoid challenges they expect to be difficult. A well-guarded city led by a respected prince will make any attack seem daunting. In Germany, many cities are well fortified and independent. They have strong walls, moats, artillery, and stores of food and supplies for a year. To keep people satisfied, they also provide work during sieges. Military training is respected, and laws are in place to maintain order. A prince with a strong city and good relations with his people cannot be overthrown easily. Any assailant would face great difficulty and would likely abandon the siege in disgrace. Some argue that people, seeing their countryside destroyed, would lose patience and turn against their prince. However, a wise and brave prince can overcome this by reassuring his subjects, instilling fear of the enemy's cruelty, and handling dissent firmly. At first, the enemy's destruction causes anger, but once the damage is done, the people are more likely to unite with their prince, feeling that he owes them for their sacrifices. People are often just as bound by the good they do for others as by the good they receive. A prudent prince can inspire his subjects to remain loyal during a siege if he has the supplies and means to defend them. Chapter 11 of Ecclesiastical Principalities. Ecclesiastical principalities are unique because their difficulties are before they are acquired. They are gained through fortune or ability, but they are kept without either, as they are supported by religious traditions that maintain them no matter how the prince behaves. These principalities do not require defense or governance, yet remain secure and stable. Their strength lies in divine support, making them unlike any other form of rule. Some may ask how the Church gained such great power, especially since before Alexander VI, its temporal authority was weak. At that time, Italy was divided among several powers: the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. Each worked to prevent foreign invasions and to limit the power of others, especially the Pope and the Venetians. To weaken the Pope, Italian rulers relied on the Roman barons, divided into the Orsini and Colonna factions, who kept the papacy weak through constant internal conflict. Even strong popes like Sextus were unable to overcome this system, as their short reigns left little time to consolidate power. Alexander VI changed everything, using Duke Valentine as his instrument and taking advantage of the French invasion. He strengthened the Church's temporal power. Though his actions were meant to benefit the Duke, they ultimately enriched the Church, which inherited his gains. Julius II built on Alexander's foundations, further increasing the Church's power by taking Bologna, defeating the Venetians, and driving the French from Italy. Unlike Alexander, Julius worked to strengthen the Church, rather than any individual. He also maintained control over the Orsini and Colonna factions, which lacked cardinals to stir up trouble. Today, Pope Leo VI finds himself at the head of a strong and respected church. It is hoped that, as previous popes expanded its power through armies, Leo will enhance its greatness through his virtues and goodwill. Chapter 12. The different kinds of militia and mercenary soldiers. Having discussed the qualities of principalities and their causes of success or failure, I will now talk about how they can defend themselves. We have already said that a prince must have strong foundations or he will fail. The foundations of all states, whether new, old, or mixed, are good laws and good arms. Since there cannot be good laws without good arms, I will focus on arms. A prince's defences can be his own forces, mercenaries, auxiliaries, or a mix of these. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are useless and dangerous. A state that relies on mercenaries is never secure, because they are disloyal, ambitious, undisciplined, and cowardly. In peace, they exploit you. In war, they abandon you. Mercenaries fight only for money, which is not enough to make them risk their lives. They stay as long as there is no war, but when fighting starts, they either run away or desert. Italy's downfall has been caused by relying on mercenaries. They seemed brave when fighting each other, but when foreign invaders arrived, they collapsed. This allowed King Charles of France to take Italy easily. Some say this was due to our sins, and that is true. But the sins were the reliance on mercenaries by Italian rulers. Mercenary captains are either capable or not. If capable, they cannot be trusted because they seek their own power, possibly overthrowing you or acting against your wishes. If they are not capable, they ruin you through their incompetence. A prince should lead his own army, and a republic should use its own citizens. A capable captain must be kept in check by law, and an incapable one must be replaced. History shows that only armed princes and republics achieve great success, while those relying on mercenaries suffer harm. Examples of the failure of mercenaries include the Carthaginians, who were betrayed by their mercenaries after a war with Rome. Philip of Macedon became the Thebans' captain and later took their freedom. Francesco Sforza, hired by Milan, defeated Venice but then turned on Milan. Queen Giovanna of Naples was left defenceless by her mercenary forces and had to seek help from the King of Aragon. In some cases, mercenaries have helped rulers, but these successes were due to chance. For example, Sir John Hawkwood served Florence, but if he had won, the city would have been at his mercy. Sforza's ambitions were directed elsewhere, and the Florentines avoided ruin only because of external factors. Paolo Vitelli, hired by Florence, posed a significant risk because, if he had succeeded, Florence would have been forced to obey him. The Venetians prospered when they fought with their own forces, but faltered when they relied on mercenaries. When their possessions grew, they feared their captain Carmagnola, who became too powerful. Unable to dismiss him, they had him killed. Later, they relied on less competent captains, leading to their defeat and loss of territories they had taken centuries to acquire. Mercenary forces have long dominated Italy. When the Holy Roman Empire's influence declined and the Church grew stronger, many cities became independent. Citizens and priests unused to war began hiring foreign soldiers. Alberigo da Como introduced this system, training leaders like Braccio and Sforza, who became powerful and controlled Italy. These mercenaries prioritized their own gain, neglected infantry, and preferred cavalry for better pay and prestige. They avoided risks, rarely killed in battles, and reduced Italy to weakness. Their methods spared themselves and their soldiers from hardship. They avoided night attacks, sieges, and winter campaigns, turning war into a game. These practices have left Italy enslaved and degraded. Chapter 13 of Auxiliary, Mixed and Native Troops. Auxiliary forces are another type of unreliable and dangerous troops. These are soldiers borrowed from another ruler to help in battle. For example, Julius II, seeing his mercenaries fail during the Ferrara campaign, turned to King Ferdinand of Spain for auxiliaries. While these troops may be strong, they are risky for the ruler who uses them. If they lose, you are defeated. If they win, you are at their mercy. A clear example is Pope Julius II, who risked his position by relying on foreign troops. Luckily for him, unexpected events prevented disaster, as the Swiss drove out the victors at Ravenna. This saved Julius from being captured by his enemies or betrayed by his allies. The Florentines, similarly, risked their position by hiring 10,000 French soldiers to attack Pisa. The Emperor of Constantinople made an even worse mistake by inviting 10,000 Turks into Greece. After the war, the Turks refused to leave, leading to the conquest of Greece by the Ottomans. Auxiliary troops are worse than mercenaries because they are unified and loyal to another leader. If they win, they can easily overpower you. Mercenaries, on the other hand, are less dangerous because they are divided and lack loyalty. Their weakness lies in cowardice, while the danger of auxiliaries is their strength. A wise prince avoids these forces and relies on his own army. It is better to lose with your own troops than to win with foreign soldiers, as victories gained with another's arms are not truly yours. Cesare Borgia provides an example. He first relied on French auxiliaries to conquer Imola and Forli. Finding them unreliable, he switched to mercenaries, hiring the Orsini and Vitelli. When they proved dangerous and disloyal, he disbanded them and built his own army. His reputation grew as he relied more on his own forces. Another example is Hero of Syracuse. After being made commander by the Syracusans, he saw the danger of his mercenary army. Unable to trust or dismiss them, he eliminated them and relied only on his own troops. Similarly, in the Bible, David refused King Saul's armor, choosing instead to fight Goliath with his own sling and stone. Using another's arms is often burdensome and ineffective. France, under Charles VIII, provides a lesson in self-reliance. Charles established a strong army of his own to liberate France from the English. However, his successor, Louis XI, disbanded the infantry and relied on Swiss mercenaries. This weakened France, as its own troops became dependent on the Swiss and lost confidence in themselves. France's mixed army of national and mercenary forces is better than relying entirely on foreign troops, but still inferior to a purely national force. Chapter 14. What the duties of a prince are with regard to the militia. A prince should focus entirely on the art of war. This is the only skill a ruler needs, as it maintains power and can even elevate private citizens to rulership. Neglecting this art leads to ruin. Francesco Sforza became Duke of Milan through his military skill, but his sons, avoiding the hardships of war, lost their position and became private citizens. A disarmed ruler is despised and cannot command respect or loyalty. An unarmed prince cannot expect obedience from armed subjects. Soldiers will distrust an unarmed leader, while the leader will fear his armed servants. This dynamic creates instability. A prince ignorant of military matters cannot gain the respect of his troops or trust them. Therefore, a prince must always train in war, especially during times of peace. This can be done in two ways: through physical practice and study. Physically, a prince should keep his soldiers disciplined and train himself through activities like hunting, which build endurance. He should study the land, learning about mountains, valleys, rivers, and plains. This knowledge helps in defending his territory and planning campaigns. Understanding one's own terrain also aids in understanding similar terrains elsewhere, enabling effective leadership in unfamiliar territories. The ancient prince Philopomen is praised for his focus on military matters, even in times of peace. While traveling, he would discuss hypothetical battle scenarios with his companions, considering the best strategies for attack and defense. This constant preparation ensured that he was ready for any situation in war. Mentally, a prince should study history, examining the successes and failures of great leaders. By imitating their strengths and avoiding their mistakes, a prince can learn how to achieve victory. For example, Alexander the Great imitated Achilles. Julius Caesar followed Alexander. and Scipio Africanus modelled himself on Cyrus as described by Xenophon. Scipio's virtues, such as generosity and kindness, reflected those of Cyrus. A wise prince prepares during peace to face challenges in adversity. By staying active and diligent, he ensures that fortune will find him ready to resist its blows. Chapter 15. Of the things for which men, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. Now we need to discuss the methods and rules a prince should follow regarding his subjects and allies. Although many have written about this, I know my views may seem bold because they differ from others. My aim, however, is to provide useful advice based on reality rather than imagination. Many have described ideal principalities and republics that do not exist. The way people live is far from how they should live, and a prince who focuses only on what should be done rather than what is done will lead himself to ruin. A man who tries to be good in every situation will fail among those who are not good. Therefore, a prince must learn how to act against goodness when necessary to preserve his power. Setting aside imaginary ideas, let us focus on real situations. All men, especially princes who hold high positions, are judged for certain qualities. Some are praised for being generous, others for being stingy, some for being cruel, others for being merciful, some for being trustworthy, others for being deceitful, some for being strong, others for being weak, and so on. While it would be ideal for a prince to possess all the qualities considered good, it is impossible to have or practice them all. Human nature does not allow it. A prince must avoid the vices that could destroy his rule, but he can tolerate those that do not threaten his power. In fact, a prince may need to accept the blame for certain vices if they help secure his position. Upon closer inspection, you will see that some things that seem virtuous can lead to ruin, while others that seem like vices can bring safety and success. Chapter 16. Of Liberality and Niggardliness. Let us begin with the first qualities mentioned. It is good to be considered generous, but generosity, if not managed wisely, can harm a prince. If a prince is too generous, he will spend all his resources and eventually burden his people with heavy taxes to maintain his reputation. This will cause the people to hate him, and his generosity will harm him more than it helps. On the other hand, if he chooses not to be generous, people may call him stingy, but this will not harm his rule. A prince who carefully manages his resources will be able to defend his state, avoid overburdening his people, and undertake important projects. Over time, his prudence will be recognized as true generosity. In our times, great achievements have come from rulers who are considered stingy, while those who tried to be generous have often been ruined. Pope Julius II, for example, used generosity to gain the papacy, but practiced frugality afterward to fund his many wars without imposing heavy taxes. Similarly, the King of Spain has achieved great successes by being careful with his resources. Therefore, a wise prince should not fear being called a miser, if it allows him to avoid overburdening his subjects, maintain his power, and avoid becoming hated. Some might argue that Julius Caesar gained power through generosity, and others have achieved success by being generous. This is true for those seeking power, as generosity can help win favor. However, once power is achieved, continued generosity can destroy a ruler. A prince must distinguish between spending his own wealth and spending the wealth of others. If he spends his own resources, he must be frugal. But if he is using the resources of others, as in times of war, he can afford to be generous. Generosity with others' wealth, such as through plunder and conquests, will enhance a prince's reputation, as seen with leaders like Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander. Excessive generosity, however, leads to ruin. A prince who spends too freely will eventually lose the ability to be generous, and may become poor and despised or resort to extortion and become hated. Of all the dangers a prince must avoid, being despised or hated are the worst. It is far better to be seen as a miser, which brings mild criticism without hatred, than to be seen as rapacious, which brings both scorn and hostility. Chapter 17. Of Cruelty and Clemency, and whether it is better to be loved or feared. Moving on to the next qualities, I say that every prince should wish to be seen as merciful and not cruel. However, he must avoid misusing this mercy. Cesare Borgia was seen as cruel, but his cruelty brought order to the Romagna, united it, and gave it peace and security. If this is seen as a benefit, it becomes clear that he was more merciful than the Florentine people, who, to avoid being called cruel, allowed Pistoia to be destroyed. A prince should not fear being called cruel if it keeps his subjects united and loyal. A few examples of cruelty are more merciful than letting disorders arise, which lead to murders and thefts that harm the entire community. Executions carried out by the prince harm only a few individuals. For a new prince, it is almost impossible to avoid being labelled cruel, because new states are full of dangers. As Virgil wrote, Queen Dido excused her harsh rule because her kingdom was new. Harsh circumstances and the newness of my reign compel me to act in such a way, and to guard my borders widely. Still, a prince must be careful in how he inspires fear, proceeding with caution and wisdom, so that he avoids being reckless or overly harsh. This leads to the question, is it better to be loved or feared? The answer is that it is ideal to be both. But if a choice must be made, it is safer to be feared than loved. This is because people are generally ungrateful, fickle, deceitful, and self-interested. They will offer their support when times are easy, but turn against you when danger arises. A prince who relies solely on their loyalty will be ruined. Friendships won through favours rather than respect are unreliable. People are less likely to offend a ruler they fear than one they love. Love is a bond of obligation, which selfish people break when it suits them. Fear is maintained by the threat of punishment, which is more reliable. However, a prince should make himself feared in a way that avoids hatred. Fear and respect can coexist if the prince avoids interfering with his subjects' property and women. When he must take a life, he should have clear reasons and justifications for doing so. Above all, he must avoid taking property, as people forget the death of a parent more easily than the loss of their inheritance. Pretexts for taking property are endless, while reasons for taking a life are fewer and less enduring. When leading an army, however, a prince must not worry about being considered cruel. Without strict discipline, an army cannot stay united or effective. Hannibal is admired for maintaining order in his diverse army, even in foreign lands. His inhuman cruelty, combined with his other virtues, made him respected and feared by his soldiers. Without his cruelty, his other qualities would not have been enough. Some criticize Hannibal for his cruelty while admiring his achievements. This criticism is misguided, as shown by the example of Scipio. Scipio, though rare in virtue, allowed too much freedom to his soldiers, leading to rebellion in Spain. Fabius Maximus accused him of corrupting the Roman military. When one of Scipio's officers destroyed Locri, Scipio did not punish him, showing excessive leniency. While this kindness did not harm him under the Roman Senate, it would have tarnished his rule if he had been emperor. In conclusion, a prince should strive to be feared and loved, but prioritize fear if both cannot be achieved. People love by choice, but fear by necessity. A wise prince relies on what he controls and avoids hatred, as explained above. Chapter 18. In what way princes must keep faith. How admirable it is for a prince to keep promises and live with honesty rather than deceit is well known. Yet experience shows that those princes who rely less on good faith and more on cunning have achieved great things. They have confused others and defeated those who built their rule on loyalty. You must understand that there are two ways to fight, one by law and the other by force. The first is proper to men, the second to beasts. Since the first is often insufficient, a prince must know how to use both. Ancient writers hinted at this when they described how Achilles and other princes were raised by Chiron the centaur, who was half beast and half man. This symbolized the need for a prince to use both human and beastly qualities. A prince must act as a beast when necessary, imitating both the fox and the lion. The lion cannot escape traps, and the fox cannot fend off wolves. Therefore, a prince must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to scare away wolves. Those who only act like lions fail to understand this. A wise prince should not keep his word if doing so harms his interests or if the reasons for the promise no longer exist. If all men were good, this rule would not apply. But since they are bad and will not keep faith with you, you are not bound to keep faith with them. A prince can always find legitimate reasons to break a promise. History is full of examples of broken treaties and faithless princes. Those who best knew how to mimic the fox succeeded the most. However, it is essential for a prince to disguise this nature and be skilled in deception. People are simple and focus on immediate needs, so anyone who deceives will always find someone willing to be deceived. For example, Alexander VI never did anything but deceive others. He was unmatched in making promises and swearing oaths, yet he never kept them. Despite this, he always succeeded because he understood the world so well. A prince does not need to possess all virtuous qualities, but he must seem to have them. It is dangerous to truly possess and practice them at all times, but appearing to possess them is useful. A prince should seem pious, faithful, humane, religious, and sincere. But he must be ready to change to the opposite qualities when necessary. A prince, especially a new one, cannot always act in ways considered good by others. To maintain his state, he may need to act against faith, charity, humanity, and religion. He must adapt to circumstances and act according to necessity. While a prince should avoid doing evil if possible, he must be ready to do so if required. A prince should ensure that everything he says is full of virtue, appearing to be all faith, integrity, humanity, and religion. Nothing is more important than seeming religious, because people judge more by what they see than what they feel. Everyone sees how you appear, but few experience your true nature. Those few who do know the truth are unlikely to challenge the majority, who are protected by the state's authority. In the actions of men, and especially princes, the outcome justifies the means. A prince must focus on maintaining his state, as his methods will be judged honourable if they succeed. Most people are influenced by appearances and results rather than the truth. The majority forms the world's opinion, and the few who see deeper cannot act when the many are content. A certain modern prince, who shall remain unnamed, constantly preaches peace and faith. Yet he is a great enemy to both, and if he had truly followed them, he would have lost his state and reputation many times over. Chapter 19, that we must avoid being despised and hated. But as I have now explained the most important qualities, I will briefly discuss the rest on the general principle that the prince must, as already noted, avoid whatever makes him hated or despised. And as soon as he achieves this, he has done his duty, and no other faults will endanger him. He will mostly become hated, as I have said, if he is greedy and seizes the property and women of his subjects, which he must never do. As long as he does not harm most people's property or honour, they will remain content, and he will only need to control the ambition of a few, which can be managed in several ways. He becomes despised if people view him as changeable, frivolous, weak, fearful, or indecisive. So a prince must avoid these qualities and make sure his actions show greatness, courage, seriousness, and strength. Regarding how he rules his people, he should make his rulings final, and stick to his decisions so that no one thinks he can be fooled or pushed into changing. A prince who builds this reputation gains a strong name, and it becomes very hard to plot against someone so respected. He also will not be easily attacked as long as his subjects value and honour him. A prince must guard against two types of dangers, one inside, concerning his people, and one outside, concerning foreign powers. He can protect himself against external threats with good weapons and good allies, and he will always have good allies if he has good weapons. Internal affairs will remain calm if they are not shaken by conspiracies, and even if outsiders try to stir up such plots, if the prince has governed and lived as I have described, he will always be able to stand firm and handle any blow, as I showed that Nabis the Spartan did. But concerning his people, even without outside interference, he should still guard against secret plots, and he does this well by avoiding hatred and contempt, and by keeping the public satisfied with him, which is necessary, as explained at length. One of the best ways for a prince to protect himself against conspiracies is to avoid being hated or despised by the majority of his people. Anyone who conspires always hopes to please the people by killing the prince. But if they think this act will upset the public, they will hesitate, for conspirators face endless obstacles. History shows that there have been many conspiracies, but few successes, because a plotter cannot act alone, and cannot find partners unless they are discontented. The moment you share your plan with an unhappy person, you give him a way to improve his own situation by betraying you, hoping to gain whatever he wants, seeing a certain advantage in revealing the plan, and only uncertainty and danger in helping you. He has to be either a very loyal friend or a fierce enemy of the prince to stay faithful. Simplifying this, the conspirator must deal with fear, jealousy, suspicion, and the risk of punishment, while the prince has the dignity of government, the law, the protection of friends, and the state to defend him. Once you add the people's goodwill to that, nobody will dare to conspire, because conspirators usually fear punishment before carrying out their plan. But in this situation, they would also fear the people's anger afterward, finding no place to hide. Many examples could be given, but I will use just one in living memory. Messer Annibale Bentivogli, Prince of Bologna and ancestor of the current Messer Annibale, was killed by the Canesci, who plotted against him. He left no relatives except Messer Giovanni, then a child, but after the murder, the people rose and killed all the Canesci. This happened because the Bentivogli house was so popular in Bologna that with no one left to govern after Annibale's death, the Bolognese heard that a member of the Bentivogli family lived in Florence, until then thought to be a blacksmith's son, and they brought him to rule the city. He governed until Messer Giovanni was old enough to take over. I conclude, then, that a prince need not worry much about plots when his people are well disposed to him, but if they are hostile and hate him, then he must fear everyone. Well-organized states and wise princes have made sure not to drive the nobles to desperation and to keep the common people content, since this is a vital concern for any prince. Among present-day kingdoms that are well structured and governed is France, and there we see many good institutions that secure the king's freedom and safety. The most important is the Parliament and its power, because the founder of that kingdom, aware of the great noble's ambition and boldness, and seeing that it was necessary to control them, and also knowing how much the masses feared and hated these nobles, set up a third authority to protect the people without it being the king's direct duty. This step removed the risk of upsetting the nobles by favouring the people and angering the people by favouring the nobles. He created a separate judge who, without being directed by the king, could check the great and help the lesser folk. No wiser or better measure could have been taken for the safety of both king and kingdom. From this we learn another key rule. Princes should delegate unpopular tasks to others while giving benefits themselves. Again, I say a prince should respect his nobles, but avoid making himself hated by the people. Some might think that the lives and deaths of several Roman emperors contradict my argument, because some who always behaved nobly and showed strong character still lost their rule or were killed by their people's conspiracies. In response, I will examine certain emperors' characters, showing that their downfall does not go against what I have said. At the same time, I will highlight certain lessons for anyone studying those times. I will limit myself to emperors from Marcus the philosopher down to Maximinus. Marcus, his son Commodus, Pertinax, Heliogabalus, Alexander, and Maximinus. The first point to notice is that, while other princes had to face only the noble's ambition and the people's insolence, the Roman emperors had the added trouble of the soldiers' brutality and greed. This problem destroyed many of them, because it was difficult to satisfy both the people and the soldiers. The people love peace, so they prefer a calm prince. But the soldiers want a bold, aggressive ruler who is cruel and greedy. The soldiers like him to use these qualities against the people, so they can receive higher pay and indulge their own greed and cruelty. As a result, the emperors who lacked enough natural or developed prestige to control both groups were doomed. Most of those who rose to the throne as new men, seeing how hard it was to balance these opposing desires, chose to satisfy the soldiers and cared little about harming the people. This was necessary, since a prince cannot avoid being hated by someone and must first try not to be hated by the majority. Failing that, he has to do everything to avoid the hatred of the most powerful group. Therefore those emperors, being new men in need of great favours, tended to please the soldiers rather than the people. Whether that strategy worked or not depended on whether the prince could maintain his standing with the troops. From these conditions, it happened that Marcus, Pertinax, and Alexander, all modest, just, gentle, and kind, came to unhappy ends, except Marcus. Marcus alone led an honoured life and died the same way, because he inherited the empire by birth and did not owe it to the soldiers or the people. Besides, he had many virtues that made him revered by everyone, keeping both the soldiers and the people in their place throughout his reign. He was never hated or despised, but Pertinax was made emperor against the soldiers' wishes. Since they were used to loose living under Commodus, they hated the decent lifestyle Pertinax wanted to force on them. Also, he was old, so they looked down on him and destroyed him at the start of his rule. This shows that a prince can be hated both for good actions and for bad ones. And so, as I said earlier, a prince who wants to stay in power is sometimes forced to do wrong. When the group you rely on, common people, soldiers, or nobles, is corrupt, you have to follow their mood and satisfy it. In that situation, doing good will harm you. Let us look now at Alexander, who was so good that, among other praiseworthy deeds, it is said that in the 14 years he ruled, no one was put to death without a fair trial. Yet, being seen as weak, allowing his mother to run things, and falling into contempt, he was killed by the army. On the other side, Commodus, Severus, and Antoninus were very cruel and greedy. To please the soldiers, there was nothing they would not do to the people, and all but Severus met a bad end. Severus, however, was so capable that by keeping the soldiers on his side, he ruled happily, despite oppressing the people. His talents made him so respected by both the soldiers and the people that the people stood in stunned awe, while the soldiers admired and accepted him. Because he accomplished such remarkable things for a new prince, I will briefly show how cleverly he used both the fox's cunning and the lion's strength. Traits I have already said a prince must learn to copy. Seeing how lazy Emperor Julian was, Severus, who led the army in Slavonia, convinced his troops it would be wise to go to Rome and avenge Pertinax, whom the imperial guard had killed. Using this excuse, without hinting that he aimed for the throne, he marched on Rome and reached Italy before his real plans were revealed. When he arrived, the Senate, afraid, named him emperor, and Julian was killed. After this start, Severus had 2 challenges left before fully controlling the empire. One in Asia, where Nigrinus led the Asiatic armies and declared himself emperor. The other in the west from Albinus, who also aimed at power. Seeing the risk of clashing with both, Severus decided to attack Nigrinus and fool Albinus. He wrote Albinus that he had been chosen emperor by the Senate and wanted to share that honour with him, gave him the title of Caesar, and with the Senate's approval made him colleague. Albinus believed all of it, but once Severus defeated and killed Nigrinus and calmed the East, he returned to Rome and accused Albinus before the Senate of plotting against him, saying he had to go punish Albinus's ingratitude. He then went to Gaul, met Albinus, and took away both his power and life. Anyone who carefully studies Severus's actions sees that he was a terrifying lion and a very cunning fox, was feared and admired by everyone, and was not hated by the army. It should not be surprising that a newcomer could hold the empire so well. because his great reputation protected him from the hatred that his greed might have stirred among the people. Severus's son Antoninus was also very capable, and had qualities that earned him respect from the public and popularity with the soldiers. Because he was a military man used to the hardest conditions, who hated fancy food and every other luxury, making him loved by all the armies. However, his cruelty was so extreme, after killing many individuals, he caused a large part of the Roman population and all of Alexandria to be put to death, that he was hated worldwide. Everyone close to him came to fear him so much that eventually a centurion killed him in the midst of his army. We must note that this sort of killing, carried out by someone determined who does not fear death, cannot really be prevented by a prince. Yet a prince need not worry too much about it, because it rarely happens. He only needs to avoid committing serious wrongs against anyone he depends on or keeps near, as Antoninus did by dishonouring the brother of that centurion and threatening him daily, all while still keeping him in his personal guard. Clearly a foolish and dangerous decision, as events proved. Now let us consider Commodus, who could have easily kept the empire by heredity as Marcus's son. He only needed to follow his father's example, to please both the people and the soldiers. But because he was cruel and vicious, aiming to prey on the people, he tried to keep the soldiers happy by letting them behave however they wanted. Meanwhile, he lost his dignity by often fighting in the arena as a gladiator and by other shameful acts beneath the imperial position. He became hated on one side and scorned on the other, so a conspiracy ended in his death. Next is Maximinus. He was very warlike, and since the troops disliked Alexander's softness, as I mentioned, they chose Maximinus after Alexander died. He did not last long because he was hated and despised for two reasons. First, his low birth as a Thracian shepherd, which was publicly known and brought him widespread scorn. Second, at the start of his reign, he delayed going to Rome to take the imperial seat and soon gained a reputation for cruelty through what his prefects did in Rome and the rest of the empire. The entire world was outraged by his humble origins, and they hated him because they feared his cruelty. So Africa rose against him, followed by the Senate and all of Rome and Italy. His own army also turned on him while besieging Aquileia. They grew angry at his cruelty, and seeing that he had so many enemies, feared him less and killed him. I will not discuss Heliogabalus, Macrinus, or Julian, who were all completely contemptible and were promptly destroyed. I will end by stating that princes today do not face the same need as those emperors did to satisfy their soldiers to an extreme degree. Because while they do need to consider their troops, it is a simpler matter. None of these princes command armies so entangled with their states running as the Roman legions were. Therefore, in those times it was necessary to please the soldiers rather than the people, because the soldiers had more power, whereas nowadays it is more important for almost all princes, except the Turk and the Soldan, to satisfy the people rather than the soldiers, since the people hold greater power. I exclude the Turk because he always keeps around 12,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry near him, on which his kingdom's security and strength depend, and so he must put them before everyone else. The same is true of the Soldan's kingdom, which is entirely in the hands of the troops, forcing him to keep their favour over the people's. Also note that the Soldan's state differs from all others, like the Christian pontificate, which is neither hereditary nor truly new, because the dead prince's sons do not inherit. Instead, the successor is chosen by those in authority. Since this system is ancient, it cannot be called a new kingdom. Although the prince is new, the established rules welcome him as if he were their natural ruler. Returning to our point, I say that anyone who carefully studies what came before will see that hatred or contempt ruined these emperors, and will see how some who behaved one way and some who behaved another ended up lucky or unlucky. Pertinax and Alexander, both new rulers, were harmed by trying to imitate Marcus, a hereditary prince. Likewise, Caracalla, Commodus, and Maximinus suffered when they tried to copy Severus without having the skill to follow his path. Hence, a new prince cannot follow all of Marcus's methods in his own domain, nor does he need to follow all of Severus's. He must take from Severus what helps him set up his power, and from Marcus what helps him sustain and glorify a state that is already secure and established. Chapter 20. Whether fortresses and other things, which princes often make, are useful or injurious. Some princes, to securely keep their territories, have disarmed their subjects. Some have kept their subjects' lands divided. Others have encouraged hostility against themselves. Others have worked to win over people they distrusted at the start of their reign. Some have built fortresses, while others have torn them down. Although we cannot decide firmly on these matters without examining the specific state where such a choice is applied, I will still speak about them in the broadest way this topic allows. A new prince has never been known to disarm his subjects. On the contrary, if he finds them unarmed, he always arms them, because in doing so, those weapons become his own. The people he once doubted become loyal, and those who were already loyal stay that way, going from mere subjects to supporters. And since not all subjects can be armed, by rewarding those who are armed, you can handle the others more safely. And this unequal treatment they witness makes the armed men feel more obligated to you, while the unarmed men forgive you, thinking that those with greater responsibility and risk rightly have more favour. But if you disarm them, you begin to offend them and show that you do not trust them, whether from fear or lack of faith, and both ideas create hatred toward you. And because you cannot stay unarmed yourself, you must use mercenaries, whose worth we have already discussed. And even if they were good, they would not be numerous enough to protect you from strong enemies and suspicious subjects. But, as I have said, a new prince ruling a new state always has his subjects armed. History is full of such examples. However, when a prince gains a new territory as an addition to his old one, then he needs to disarm that territory, except for those who helped him take it, and even these people must eventually be weakened or softened, setting things up so that all the new territory's weapons remain in the hands of your own troops, who live near you in your old territory. Our ancestors, and those called wise, used to say that Pistoia should be held by encouraging factions, and Pisa should be held by fortresses. And with this purpose they stirred disagreements among the subjects in certain towns to control them more easily. Back in those days when Italy was fairly divided, that was no doubt a good plan. But it does not seem good to me now, because I do not think such divisions do any good. In fact, when the enemy comes, divided cities will instantly be lost, because the weaker side will team up with the enemy, and the stronger side will not hold out. The Venetians, moved by the reasons I have just described, supported Guelph and Ghibelline factions in the cities they ruled, And though they never let these rivalries turn bloody, they still favoured these differences, so that the citizens, busy fighting each other, would not oppose them. However, this did them no good, as was shown after their defeat at Vaila, when some of those subjects promptly got bold and took the entire state from them. Besides, such methods show a prince's weakness, because no strong government would allow such disunity. They may be useful only in peacetime, when they make it simpler to manage your subjects. But in war, the flaws of such policies immediately come to light. Undoubtedly, princes become greater when they overcome challenges and resistance. And so fortune, especially when it wants to make a new prince successful, who needs prestige more than an inherited prince, brings him enemies and forces him to make war, so that he has the chance to beat them and rise higher, climbing the ladder that his enemies have set up for him. Many people therefore believe that a wise prince, if he can, should cleverly stir up some hostility, so that by crushing it he can increase his standing. Princes, and especially new ones, have found that those they suspected at the start of their reign turned out to be more loyal and more helpful than those they initially trusted. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, ruled more effectively through people he had once suspected than through others. But we cannot examine this issue in detail, because it varies from case to case. I will only note that men who were enemies at the start of a new government, if they need outside support to keep their positions, can be won over easily by the prince. They feel they must prove, through their actions, that the earlier bad opinion of them was wrong, so the prince usually gains more from them than from those who feel safer and pay less attention to his interests. Also, I will not forget to remind a prince who has newly taken a state with the covert help of its inhabitants that he should carefully consider the reasons these people supported him. If it was not genuine affection for him, but only their dissatisfaction with the previous government, he will struggle to keep their loyalty because he cannot please them all. Looking closely at examples from both past and present, we see that it is much easier to win over those who were happy with the old system, and thus were originally enemies, than to keep the friendship of those who, being unhappy before, became his allies and helped him seize power. Princes have traditionally built fortresses to secure their states, as both a barrier to those who plot against them, and as a safe refuge from a sudden attack. I support this idea because it is an old practice. Even so, we have seen in our time how Messer Niccolò Vitelli tore down 2 fortresses in Città di Castello to maintain control of that land. Guide Ubaldo, Duke of Urbino, when he returned to his lands after being driven out by Cesare Borgia, razed all the fortresses in that province, believing that without them he would be less likely to lose his dominion again. The Bentivogli, on returning to Bologna, used the same approach, so fortresses can be either helpful or harmful depending on the circumstances. If they help you in one way, they can harm you in another. We might put it like this: a prince who fears his people more than foreign powers should build fortresses, but a prince who fears foreign powers more than his own people should do without them. The castle of Milan, built by Francesco Sforza, has caused and will continue to cause more trouble for the Sforza family than any other problem in that state. The best fortress of all is to be found in the people's support, because even if you have fortresses, they will not protect you if you are hated by your subjects. When the people take up arms against you, there will always be outsiders ready to help them. In our time, we see that fortresses have not helped any prince, except the Countess of Forli, when her husband Count Girolamo died, for she managed to escape the rebellion of the people and wait for help from Milan to retake the state. The situation then was such that no foreign power could help the people. Still, the fortresses did her little good later when Cesare Borgia attacked, because the people, hating her, joined forces with the foreign invader. So then and before, it would have been better for her not to be hated by the people than to rely on fortresses. With all this in mind, I praise anyone who builds fortresses and anyone who does not. And I criticize those who rely on fortresses but pay no attention to whether they are hated by their people. Chapter 21. How a Prince Must Act in Order to Gain Reputation. Nothing makes a prince more respected than undertaking great projects and setting an extraordinary example. Look at Ferdinand, King of Aragon, now King of Spain. He can almost be considered a new prince, because he rose from being a weak king to becoming the most famous and glorious king in Christendom. If you look at his actions, they are all significant and often remarkable. Early in his reign, he attacked Granada. That campaign laid the groundwork for his kingdom. He started slowly, without worrying about interference, and kept the lords of Castile busy with this war so they would not think of making changes. This way, he built up his reputation and gained power over them without their noticing it. With money from the church and the people, he kept his armies in the field, and through that long war established the military strength that later made him famous. Also to take on bigger ventures, and always under the excuse of religion, he resorted to a pious cruelty, driving out the Moors from his kingdom and stripping them of their property. This was an outstanding and rare example. He also attacked Africa under this same religious pretext, then moved into Italy, and he has recently targeted France. He has always come up with great plans that leave his subjects amazed and uncertain, busy waiting to see the outcome. And these actions have grown one from the other, giving people no time to rest or oppose him. It also helps a prince to show exceptional judgment in home affairs, as was said of Messer Bernabo of Milan. If someone does something truly unusual, whether good or bad in civilian life, the prince should find a way to reward or punish them in a manner that gets people talking. Above all, a prince must try in everything he does to gain a reputation for greatness and excellence. He is also respected if he is a true friend or a true enemy. That is, if he openly declares his position for or against someone. This approach is always better than staying neutral. If two neighboring powers go to war, either one's victory could threaten you, or it could not. In either case, it is safer to choose a side and fight openly. In the first case, if you stay neutral, you will become the victor's prize, and the defeated side, having gained nothing from you, will not help you either. The winner will not want shaky friends who did not aid him in his time of need, and the loser will not welcome you because you did not support him. Antiochus went to Greece at the invitation of the Aetolians to drive out the Romans. He sent envoys to the Achaeans, who were friendly with the Romans, urging them to remain neutral, while the Romans asked them to join in fighting. During the debate among the Achaeans, Antiochus's ambassador recommended neutrality, but the Roman envoy answered that doing so would only ensure they became the victor's prize without any favour or reputation. Indeed, the side that is not your friend will want you to stay neutral, while the side that is your friend will urge you to choose arms. Princes who try to avoid immediate dangers by remaining neutral usually end up destroyed. But when a prince clearly sides with one party, if that ally wins, and even if he is powerful, leaving you somewhat at his mercy, he still owes you and will not treat you with total ingratitude. Because no victory is ever so great that the victor can ignore all fairness. On the other hand, if your ally loses, he will protect you as long as he can, and you share a fate that might yet improve. In the second scenario, where there is no risk to you from whoever wins, it makes even more sense to side with someone. You help destroy one side with the support of the other, who should have saved the loser if he were wise. And if this ally triumphs, he is then in your power, and it is hard for him to fail if you have helped him. It should also be noted that a prince should never team up with someone mightier than himself in order to hurt someone else, unless he has no choice. Because if that ally wins, you are at his mercy. Princes must avoid such dependence if they can. The Venetians joined France against the Duke of Milan, even though they could have avoided it, and that decision led to their ruin. But when it cannot be helped, like when the Pope and Spain brought their armies into Lombardy, forcing the Florentines to choose, then the prince should do so for the reasons given. No state should think it can follow a completely safe policy. It must accept that every path is uncertain. This is how things work. You cannot avoid one problem without running into another, but good judgment means knowing these problems well enough to choose the least harmful option as the best one. A prince must also show love for merit, honoring those who are outstanding in any art or skill. He should encourage his people to do their work in peace, whether in trade, farming, or any craft, so that nobody fears investing in property lest it be taken away, or starting a business lest it be taxed too heavily. Instead, he should reward whoever improves the city or the state in any way. Also, at suitable times during the year, he ought to keep the people involved with festivals and shows. Since every city is divided into guilds or groups, he should pay attention to them, interact with them occasionally, and show humanity and generosity, while never allowing the dignity of his rank to be diminished in any situation. Chapter 22 of the Secretaries of Princes. Choosing a prince's ministers is very important. Whether they are good or bad depends on the prince's wisdom. You can quickly judge a ruler's ability by looking at the people he chooses to help him. If they are capable and loyal, you can think him wise for recognizing their talent and keeping them faithful. But if they turn out the opposite, you may assume he has made a bad first decision in choosing them. Everyone who knew Messer Antonio da Venafro, minister to Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, considered Pandolfo a very smart ruler for having him. People have three types of intelligence. One can understand things on its own, another can understand them when explained, and a third can neither understand them alone nor when shown by others. The first type is excellent, the second is good, and the third is useless. If Pandolfo did not have the first kind, he must have had the second, because every time someone has the sense to recognize what is good or bad in what a minister does or says, although he might not come up with the idea himself, he can still fix the mistakes and praise the successes, and the minister cannot fool him and therefore remains loyal. To check if a minister is trustworthy, watch if he thinks more about his own profit than the prince's. If he does, he is not a good minister, and you cannot rely on him. Anyone handling another person's state must never think of himself, but only of that prince. On the other hand, a prince should also think of his minister, honouring and enriching him, doing him favours, giving him titles, and entrusting him with important tasks, so that the minister, already wealthy and respected, will not seek more, and will fear losing what he has by any change. When princes and their ministers work like this, they can rely on each other. Otherwise, it ends badly for one or both. Chapter 23. How Flatterers Must Be Shunned. I must not overlook a major issue, one that princes find hard to avoid unless they are very prudent and make wise decisions. The danger of flatterers, who fill every court. People love their own ideas so much that they easily deceive themselves. And trying to escape flattery without becoming despised is difficult. The only way to avoid flattery is to let people know they will not offend you by telling you the truth. But if everyone feels free to tell you the truth about everything, you lose their respect. Thus, a sensible prince should choose wise men in his state and allow them to speak honestly to him about only the things he asks about, listening to their views on every subject he raises. After hearing them, he should make his own decisions and act so everyone sees that those who speak most openly are most welcome. Apart from this group, the prince should not listen to anyone else, should go about matters carefully, and then stand firm in his resolutions. A ruler who does otherwise either rushes into errors because of flattery or constantly changes his mind due to conflicting opinions, leading people to think little of him. A modern example, Pre-Luca, who served Emperor Maximilian, said that although the emperor never asks anyone's advice, he never follows his own plans either. He keeps them secret until he starts carrying them out, at which point his advisers oppose him, and it is easy to make him abandon them. So he undoes one day what he did the day before, and no one knows his intentions or trusts his decisions. A prince should take advice only when he chooses, not when others push it on him. He should discourage unsolicited advice, but be a frequent questioner and patient listener of the truth regarding anything he asks about. If he finds a counselor hesitant to speak honestly, he should be upset by that. Some believe that a prince is considered wise because of his good advisers, but that is wrong, because a prince who is not wise cannot accept good advice unless he hands over full power to one prudent person who rules everything, which would not last long, as that adviser would likely take the state for himself. Also, by discussing matters with several people, a prince who lacks wisdom will never form a united plan, because each counsellor looks out for his own interests, and the prince cannot recognize or correct this. Men are always false to you, unless forced by necessity to be truthful. Thus, we must conclude that good advice, wherever it comes from, ultimately depends on the prince's own wisdom, not the other way around. Chapter 24. Why the princes of Italy have lost their states. The things mentioned above, if followed wisely, make a new prince appear old-established, and immediately make him safer and more stable in his domain than if he had long held it. A new prince is watched more carefully than an inherited ruler, and when his actions are recognized as worthy, he gains stronger loyalty than someone of ancient lineage. People care more about their current situation than the past, and if they see they are prospering in the present, they are satisfied and want nothing else. In fact, they will do anything to defend him, as long as he does not fail them in other ways. So he enjoys twice the honor of having founded a new state and strengthened it with good laws, good arms, good friends, and good examples, just as someone who is born into rule and loses it through lack of wisdom suffers double the shame. And if one looks at those rulers who have lost their position in Italy in our times, such as the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and others, one will first notice they shared a problem with their military forces, as discussed at length. Next, we see that some of them faced hostility from their people. Or if the people were friendly, they could not keep the nobles on their side. Without these flaws, no state with enough strength to field an army would be lost. Philip of Macedon, not Alexander the Great's father, but the one defeated by Titus Quintius, did not have a large kingdom compared to the mighty Rome and Greece who attacked him. But because he was a skilled soldier who knew how to keep the people distracted and the nobles loyal, he held out against them for many years, and though in time he lost control of several cities, he still kept his kingdom. Therefore, our princes who held their lands for many years should not blame luck for losing them, but their own carelessness. Having never thought in calm times that things could change, a common mistake, they chose to run when trouble came, instead of defending themselves, hoping the people, angered by the conqueror's insolence, would call them back. That plan, when all else fails, can work. But it is very bad to ignore every other remedy in favour of just that one. No one should want to fall merely because he trusts that someone else will pick him up. Maybe that help will come, maybe not. Even if it does, it is not safe, because such a defence is seen as cowardly and unreliable. The only defences that are good, secure, and lasting are those that depend on yourself and your own abilities. Chapter 25. How much fortune can do in human affairs, and how it may be opposed. I am well aware that many people, both past and present, believe worldly affairs are directed so completely by fortune and by God that human prudence cannot affect them, and that nothing can be done about it, so they think it is pointless to work hard, letting chance guide everything. This idea has gained more believers in our time, given the enormous and unexpected changes we have seen and continue to see each day. Sometimes, when I reflect on it, I find myself partly agreeing with this view. However, to keep our free will from being entirely lost, I believe fortune controls about half of our actions, while letting us control the other half, or slightly less. I compare fortune to a raging river. When it overflows, it floods the plains, destroys trees and buildings, sweeps away soil on one side, and deposits it on the other, and everyone flees before it, because resistance is impossible. Yet, even though it behaves this way, people can build defences like dams and levees when it is calm, so that when it swells, it is directed into channels or made less destructive. The same is true of fortune. She shows her strength wherever people fail to prepare for her, and vents her fury where she finds no dikes or defences. If you look at Italy, which has been the centre of these changes, you see a land without any protective barriers. And if it had been safeguarded as Germany, Spain, or France are, this flood would not have caused such massive upheaval, or might not have happened at all. This is enough to say about resisting fortune in a general sense. Turning to specific instances, you may see a prince who is prosperous one day and ruined the next, with no apparent change in his nature or behaviour. I think this stems, above all, from the reasons we have already examined, for a prince who relies wholly on fortune falls when fortune shifts. I also believe that someone whose methods suit the times will succeed, while someone whose methods go against the times will fail. We see that people use different approaches to reach their goals of fame and wealth. Some are cautious, others bold. Some use force, others use trickery. Some are patient, others are the opposite, and by these varied means they may achieve their aims. We also see two prudent men, where one succeeds and the other fails, just as two people can succeed using opposite methods, one careful, one reckless, simply because the times either suit their approach or do not. This shows that two men can act differently, yet reach the same result, while two others might act the same way, but only one succeeds. And fortune's shifts also stem from this pattern. If the moment and situation favor someone who is cautious and sensible, he prospers. But if circumstances change and he does not adjust, he will fail. No one is able to adapt perfectly, either because he cannot go against his own nature, or because, having always succeeded by doing things one way, he cannot bring himself to abandon that strategy. So a careful person, when it is necessary to act quickly, fails to do so and is destroyed. If a man could alter his nature in step with the times, fortune would never change. Pope Julius II was always bold and impulsive, and he found the times and conditions matched that approach so well that he consistently succeeded. Look at his first war against Bologna, when Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still alive, where the Venetians did not like it, and both the King of Spain and France disapproved. Yet he personally led the campaign, causing Spain and the Venetians to pause. The Venetians out of fear, and Spain because it wanted to retake the Kingdom of Naples, while he drew in the King of France, who felt he could not refuse him troops without harming their alliance. With this sudden action, Julius accomplished what no other pope could have done, however wise he might be. If he had waited for everything to be perfectly arranged before leaving Rome, as most popes would, it would never have happened, for the King of France would have come up with countless excuses, and others would have filled him with countless fears. I will skip the rest of his actions, which all followed the same pattern and were all successful. Since he died relatively soon, he never saw a change of circumstances that demanded caution. Had such a moment arisen, he would have been ruined, because he never would have departed from the methods his nature led him to use. So I conclude that since fortune changes, while people often stay the same, they do well as long as their methods fit the times, but fail when their methods clash with the times. In my view, it is better to be daring than careful, because fortune is like a woman. If you want to control her, you must take her by force, and indeed, she gives way more readily to boldness than to restraint. Consequently, like a woman, she favors the young, for they are less cautious, more aggressive, and manage her with greater audacity. Chapter 26. Exhortation to liberate Italy from the Barbarians. Having now thought about everything we have discussed, and considered whether this moment might be right for a new prince to arise in Italy, and if the current situation offers a chance for a wise and capable person to introduce a new system that would bring honor to himself and benefit to many, it seems to me that so many factors come together to favor a new ruler that I cannot imagine a better time for such an undertaking. And if, as I said, the power of Moses was shown only because the people of Israel had been slaves in Egypt, if Cyrus's greatness and bravery were revealed because the Persians were oppressed by the Medes, and if Theseus's high qualities were made clear because the Athenians were scattered then, in our own time, to show the strength of an Italian leader, it was necessary that Italy be reduced to her present condition, more enslaved than the Hebrews, more crushed than the Persians, and more divided than the Athenians. She is without a leader, without order, beaten, plundered, torn apart, and overrun, having endured every sort of disaster. Although in the past someone did appear who seemed chosen by God to rescue her, at the pinnacle of his successes, fortune cast him aside, and now, nearly lifeless, she waits for someone who can heal her wounds and end the looting of Lombardy, the greed and exploitation in the kingdom and Tuscany, and cure her long-festering sores. See how she prays to God for someone to free her from this brutal cruelty and insolence. And see how ready she is to follow any banner, if only there is someone to raise it. There is nothing left now for her to hope, except that your illustrious house will take on this redemption, having risen so high through both power and fortune, aided by God and the Church, whose leadership it now holds. Nor will you find this too difficult if you keep in mind the deeds and lives of the men I have mentioned. Although they were remarkable and amazing, they were still only human, and each of them had less reason than you to take on such a task. Their cause was not more just, nor simpler, nor was God more a friend to them than he is to you. You have a just cause, for a war is fair if it is necessary, and those weapons are compassionate which offer the only hope. You will find great willingness among the people, and wherever there is great willingness, the difficulties are fewer, provided you follow the methods of the great men I have presented as examples. Moreover, we have seen signs that seem like miracles performed by God. The sea has opened, a cloud has guided you, water has burst from the rock, manna has fallen, and everything has combined to make you great. Now you must do your part. God does not do everything, to avoid taking from us our free will and the share of glory that belongs to us. It is not surprising that none of the Italians who have come before achieved what we may hope your illustrious house will accomplish. If, in all the upheavals in Italy and the many battles fought there, it seems as though military skill has faded, that is because the old methods were not good, and nobody arose who knew how to devise new ones. Nothing honors a new leader so much as new laws and policies that he introduces, and if these are well planned and significant, they bring him respect and admiration. Italy offers plenty of room for such measures, because here there is great ability among ordinary people, if only it were not lacking among the leaders. Notice how in single combats and small gatherings, Italians surpass others in strength, skill, and intelligence. But in forming armies, they fall short. This comes completely from the weakness of their leaders, for those who are knowledgeable refuse to obey, and everyone believes he knows best, since there has never been anyone who rose so high by talent and fortune as to make the rest yield. Hence, during all these years and all these conflicts of the last 2 decades, any time an entirely Italian army took the field, it ended in failure, as we saw at Taro, then at Alessandria, Capua, Genoa, Vaila, Bologna, and Mestre. If your illustrious house wants to follow the example of those great men who rescued their homelands, it is necessary, above all, as the true foundation of every plan, to create your own troops, for you cannot find any soldiers more loyal, trustworthy, or better, and though each one of them may be skilled, they will be even better together when they see they are led by their prince, honoured, and treated well by him. So you must prepare such forces in order to defend the country from foreigners with Italian courage. Though both the Swiss and Spanish infantry are seen as formidable, they each have weaknesses that a different kind of force could not only withstand, but hope to defeat. The Spanish cannot hold out against cavalry, while the Swiss must fear infantry that can confront them with equal determination. It follows, as experience shows, that the Spanish cannot resist French cavalry, and the Swiss are beaten by Spanish foot soldiers. And while we have not seen a complete test of this last point, we had a glimpse at the Battle of Ravenna, where Spanish infantry attacked German ranks, which used the same tactics as the Swiss. By their agility and use of shields, the Spaniards got in between and under their spears, safely attacking while the Germans could not defend themselves. If cavalry had not charged the Spaniards, they would have destroyed the Germans completely. Knowing then the flaws of both types of infantry, it is possible to develop a third kind that can stand up to cavalry and not fear infantry, which can be done not by new recruits, but by a shift in strategy. Introducing these new systems will bring a new prince fame and greatness. Therefore, this chance should not be allowed to pass, letting Italy finally see her deliverer. I cannot express how warmly he would be welcomed in all those provinces that have been tormented by these foreign invasions, with what eagerness for revenge, with what steadfast faith, with what love, and with what grateful tears. Which door would stay closed to him? Who would refuse to obey him? Who would dare to envy him? Which Italian would not side with him? This foreign domination is hated by everyone. May your illustrious house accept this mission then, with the courage and hope that come from a just cause, so that under its banner our homeland may be uplifted, and under its guidance that verse of Petrarch may be proven true. Valour against fell wrath will take up arms, and be the combat quickly sped, for sure the ancient worth that in Italians stirs the heart is not yet dead. The end. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the prince. I hope this simplified reading made Machiavelli's ideas more approachable, while honouring his vision and influence on political thought. If you found it valuable, please subscribe and give the video a like, so we can continue creating more free audiobook experiences. Until next time, keep exploring the power of great books.